So, alright, let me just, alright, make sure I'm not going over my limits, and, alright, Candide, A Tale of Optimism, or the Candide or All That's for the Best, or the Optimism. There's different, it has a few different kind of titles out there, but the original French title was Candide ou l'Optimisme, me. And of course, I couldn't have recognized that or I couldn't have committed that to memory, so, but it's a really classic work of literature. It came out in 1759, right after the Lisbon earthquake of Portugal, which is like a infamous, like, a very notorious, disastrous earthquake that, like, it killed, I believe, like, the death toll might have been at least in the, not tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands, I think, or at least close, and although I might be way off with that, but it was so, because Lisbon's, very much, it's part of Europe, if you're going through in and out of Spain or near, even not too far from France too, which is kind of where Voltaire's stomping ground is. But yeah, the Lisbon, it actually was such a tremor, like the tremors of the earthquake were so effective, like were so disastrous that it actually, like, so far reaching that it actually hit the North African coast, I think, somewhere near the kind of Algeria, that kind of area. So one can imagine why that caused so much distress for Europeans, and all of them collectively kind of were very much, especially the philosophers and all the thinkers and the Enlightenment people, like Voltaire. He was one of the main, although that wasn't his real name. His real name was actually Françoise Marie Aurier, I believe. Aurier. And yeah, he was something of a polymath himself, and he was at the time very much against the Leibniz, either, Gottfried Leibniz was very much against this proposition that this world, what we have it as it is the best of all possible worlds, because that was something that Voltaire was vehemently against, and he satirizes that, and very much in this very picaresque, meaning that, picaresque is kind of an adventure novel where there's it's also kind of a lot of Bildungsroman too, because Candide is a young man, and he's going all across the world, and it's like there's like so much happening in this. There's like lots of death, and it's like, and the way that Voltaire masterfully, his great thing is being able to talk with an air of, like, not without being flippant, but with through a kind of a polemicist, satirical lens. He's able to depict so much suffering and heartbreak and loss and the stuff that actually happens in life, which is when, in this world as it is, and he's just trying to hold up he's basically holding up, not necessarily playing devil's advocate so much as he was holding up a mirror to society and not even in like a holier than thou way, but just kind of in a wit. He had a very masterful wit to Voltaire, and if you look into Leibniz a little bit deeper, it's almost like a little bit hard to see the two sides of Leibniz, because there was one side of him that was, and I've only read like one tiny short little work by him. I can't remember. I don't know if it was the Discourse on Metaphysics, but that's where the famous, very infamous, we live in the best of all possible worlds, and that was kind of also a kind of thing that Thomas Aquinas, some 5 centuries earlier, was he 12 or 1300s, I believe, the Italian, obviously wrote Summa Theologica. I have not read any of his stuff yet, but I've read of him a decent amount of stuff to kind of glean his take on it, and I think he had, at least him, along with other people like Saint Anselm of Canterbury, had different cosmological arguments for God, and I don't want to get into the dirty on into the nitty gritty of the logic and the kind of reasoning and the kind of the rationalizations that they sought, and how we live in the world. But it did seem kind of similar to why or how exactly Leibniz was seeing this kind of world. He was like, one part of him was this a polymath. He was very much steeped in. He even kind of, in fact, he was so prolific for as a mathematician that he actually was credited as co-inventing or kind of on the cusp of contemporaneously, I think, with Isaac Newton on like in inventing calculus. I think, and I think if you look in the, was it Number Files video? I can't remember. But yeah, they actually had the documents on like what exact date and stuff. If you want to look at their video and other people's much more sophisticated, educated view on it. I'm just kind of on the outside looking in, seeing like, oh well, his mind was very, very interesting. Voltaire's too, but yeah, obviously, Leibniz. It was interesting because the way he came up with like monadology, the monads, and the things that are like almost like akin to what some might say are like the kind of lowest common denominator kind of like atomic level, or like something even beyond that, a thing like in and I think that's in his metaphysics. But he that's the interesting thing, is that the way, and but Leibniz too, he didn't live too far. I want to say, so he was born in 1646 and then died in 1716, so he was about maybe 50 or so years older. Voltaire was born in 1694. And so, but by the time an interesting thing is that, Voltaire was already at least in his 50s or 60s when he wrote Candide in 1759. And I want to say that he saw enough of the world and like, and all the idea of, and the problem, the dilemma of evil and all that. He was writing, one of his most famous quotes, in fact, is, if God did not exist, it would be necessary to invent him. So you probably heard that before, but you might not have known it was Voltaire. And I have to keep checking myself to see, it's like, was that Voltaire or something? Because I have to, but like it's usually, sometimes it shows up in French too. Very elegant language. It's like one of the best. And I also keep reminding myself that Leibniz was German, not French. It's a little bit of a confusing because it's like name. But yeah, so and it also I'm probably mispronouncing 90% of these names. Anyway, so the problem of evil with him is that, so Voltaire had in Candide, there's it presents itself kind of as there's so much extreme things happening, but it's through this very matter-of-fact kind of removed lens of an observer, which it adds to the humor of it. And even though it's taken me so much to describe it, and I'm using a lot of words and a voluble amount of time to describe it, it would be hard-pressed of me not to remind you that Candide is a very short work. It's like less than 4-hour read, I think, and maybe at best 150 pages or something like that, depending on your version, I think. And I have to also remind myself to reassess and to at least reread it every once in a while, and I've yet to reread it. I feel bad about that because it's such a quick read, and it's very lively too. It's very engaging. It seems like from what I'm telling you, it's like all this stuff is told, all this very depressing anguish that happens throughout Candide's life. But it's jam-packed with all this stuff that's happening, and it all, and I think that's what makes it such a powerhouse of a novel, because it's not like The Life and Opinions of Tristram Shandy, which is by Lawrence Stern, which is it's quite a tome. It was published in 9 volumes, and I think it was a little bit around the time of Voltaire too. I think about the 1760s maybe earlier. I'm not sure. But Lawrence Stern, yeah, I think the reason I kind of got into that was because of in Ulysses and I think other Joyce's works, he mentions the historical importance of the life and opinions of Tristram Shandy. It's also kind of a picaresque novel too. And Schopenhauer also holds that book and Don Quixote and Candide as, I think, I'm not so sure about Candide, but I think he mentions Schopenhauer mentions Hegel as a Panglossian guy. He goes off way on the records. If you like read anything by Schopenhauer, he'll like for like the longest duration of like holding. He'll just like be like describing things as they are, and he's like he's just very matter of fact, just like very crystal clear understanding of just like yes, and then there of with a kind of with a twinge of empathy towards like those who are suffering, and like he's in a removed way, he was like describing a kind of a kind of an unintelligent moronic boy. I think that he was like trying to figure out like how he saw the world and think, and then he was like, and then I think he was also, but then there's parts where he'll just like all out of nowhere just like start railing against Hegel as like this Panglossian idiot that thinks that this is the best of all possible worlds, in a way that he kind of had his own spirit, the Hegelian phenomenologic spirit, like the dialectic of history. This is me very, very, very generalizing, but it's also really hard to read Hegel. I have to say that Schopenhauer, despite having a more depressing view of life, in short, a pessimism, I'd actually take his, I'd actually rather read his stuff because it's like a lot easier, at least for me to understand than and to digest than Hegel, because Hegel was like going on and on about the dialectic of history, and that we're all going towards like a more history is going towards some meaningful aspect of something, and that there's the phenomenology of like what it's there's the side of, I think, of phenomenology basically deals with what it's like to be, and that's kind of an early proponent. Because if you look at the phenomenologists like Edmund Husserl or Martin Heidegger as heavy hitters, and like Henri Bergson, I think they all they came around like a good 150 years or so after Hegel. So that's an interesting kind of thing, that phenomenology as a term wasn't really implemented until like that. But Hegel had an interesting take on the word before that, way far before anyone else did. And I'm almost like a kind of mix of both, where I'm like, part of me sees like history is going somewhere, having a meaningful teleological end goal, whereas Schopenhauer comes from, I'm a bit of excuse me, a Schopenhauerian at heart when it comes to like maybe the world as idea, and maybe the world isn't all the best as it's made out to be. But anyway, I want to I'm not going to so much go into the aside from the historical context with Candide, but I did want to at least give a kind of quick wrap up of like, so Candide follows a young man who's it's split into 30 chapters. Another reason why it seems much bigger than it is. And Candide is from Westphalia. So he's born into kind of what's described as like an Garden of Eden kind of, almost similar to the Buddha, the story of the Buddha, in the sense of Siddhartha Gautama having a, not sure how to describe, seeing the world. It's kind of similar to that. It's almost like a very tongue-in-cheek kind of modern, or at least what was then considered, around the Regency kind of period, I guess, of kind of an account of the Buddha, with Candide kind of being he's described as a man who's with the most unaffected simplicity, which doesn't mean a bad thing. It just means that he's just, he lives his life. He's born into kind of a privileged kind of society where he's able to kind of have a comfort and means, but he's then so much is spawned out of one simple little thing. So what I love about Voltaire is his ability to kind of show the domino kind of effect of like, I guess, I don't know if you would call it like a lack of free will, I guess, because throughout the whole entire thing, Candide is like a very funny, actually, kind of take on a flat arc, I think, where he's but near the end of the novel, not to give spoilers because there's I don't know if you could really spoil such a great novel, but there is a he does have a great change of heart, but it's not he's I'm not sure what I describe it as. I think it would be like Candide has a massive. He just has everybody around him kind of changes, but like he himself, and he's it's hard to describe because he does have a he's definitely like way depressed, and he's like extremely disillusioned with the world around him. So he does have some kind of an arc, but he's also it's mostly the stuff happening around him too that also kind of that spawns that. So the interesting thing is the character of Dr. Pangloss is that he's there's all these different kind of the main people kind of orbiting around Candide, and one of the main people is his mentor, who is this this kind of very tongue in cheek kind of wry. He's portrayed as this very ineffectual kind of guy. He's just kind of loading around. He's just kind of moseying around, and not really. He's people wonder the I guess the qualifications he has, the questionable aspect of his degree, which is basically in French it's metaphysico theologica de slash cosmologically or cosmology, which is basically his professor of metaphysico theologico cosmonological. Okay, so that was maybe it wasn't that different in French, but which basically it sounds like the biggest kind of BS kind of thing. Not too much different than kind of maybe what the kind of Dr. Mills that churn out these degrees that really don't have any value in the world. But yeah, so he's continuously repeating the same motif, which is we live in the best of all possible worlds. So as things okay, so as I left off, as things escalate around Candide, things, like literally there's earthquakes on the scale of Lisbon, there's deaths, people firing squads, Cunigod, his love interest throughout the whole thing is like, I think she's raped at some point. It's so awful. And then throughout as all this stuff happens, Pangloss continuously is like, it's just for the best, Candide. We live all for the best, or this is the best of all possible worlds. And one of the quotes I loved from it was, if this is the best of all possible worlds, then where are the others? I think at some point Candide asked that of Pangloss. Because it really does kind of take, for lack of a better word, takes the piss out of a lot of this aspect of, oh well, it's just possible. Just stop. Don't question anything. Don't question the validity of it. It's God wanted it. Because like I said, I think at some point Leibniz was a Christian, right? So he had these I don't know, kind of interesting kind of conflictions in his own life, where he's like on one side very mathematically very philosophically, he was like kind of a genius in his own right, but at the same time in almost maybe it might have been a kind of a question of the time, because people as far back, even like Francois Rabelais, a great titan of French literature, and with Gargantua and Pantagruel, he had to kind of watch out for the censorship and the stuff like that, and the making sure not to be a little bit too I guess, and all the way up until as far maybe as Nabokov too in the 50s, he had to deal with censorship and stuff like that, and D.H. Lawrence had to deal with that with his the language and stuff he used in realistically depicting stuff. So I do understand that maybe Leibniz had to kind of cover himself a little bit, his own, in order to kind of, I don't know, to kind of just like in that sense, maybe that's why it seems like it's a contradictory kind of thing that he had. But anyway, so yeah, so this all happens when Pangloss is seen one of the members of the household in this kind of the well-off kind of affluent place named Paquette, I think Paquette. He sees Pangloss and her outside, kind of hiding in the bushes, and I believe they're making love. And at some point, there's a this kind of it's a weird way that kind of inspires him to approach Cunigod, because he's like he has a kind of a love interest throughout the whole entire thing. That's kind of the sustained love interest, and in that sense, it's kind of a take on romanticism too. It's kind of a tongue-in-cheek kind of. It's both a sincere romantic tale. It's I don't think Voltaire had a soft spot for kind of romantic kind of things like that, in the same way that he had a picaresque kind of thing in like adventure literature as well. But at the same time, I think because of that, this ends up with his being kicked out of the castle in Westphalia. So now he ends up in the arms of these like Prussian people, and they're like when they're on their, I think they are these like it's basically he's pushed into military service. So Candide is thrust into this world of being flogging, and at some point he's almost executed, and goes to all the way and thrown into a all-out war between these I believe the Bulgar of those Prussian people and the Avars. So that's kind of another kind of what actually did happen between the I think the Prussians and the French in real life. And so then there's other people, excuse me, I think Jacques, this Anabaptist person, and then all these people keep going back to kind of tell him that everything is okay. It's like, it's not the end of the world. This is the best of all possible worlds. So they keep, all these people kind of reinforce the Pangloss sentiment. So even when Pangloss isn't there, somebody sent in his place kind of is summoned up to kind of repeat that refrain. So now Candide, and then at some point, Pangloss ends up a beggar, afflicted with a disease of some kind. I think it's syphilis, and so he's just wandering the streets, and because of his tryst he had with Paquette in it. So now, I think this keeps going on, and then there's all of them are at some point they get together and they travel to Lisbon, and then that's, of course, there's the storm, and then at some point I think the earthquake, and then in very much in the same way that it happened in 1759, or I'm sorry, 1755. This came out a few years later, and then like I said, they just keep going on it, and then tens of thousands of people are killed, and then and then there's also the Inquisition is invoked at some point, with, I think, Pangloss is continuously, even though he's like literally his entire life he's after being kicked out of the castle in Westphalia, his entire life is a kind of walking mess. He's still like, oh well, all is for the best. And at some point he's the Inquisition, I think, at some point and then he because of his whole optimistic philosophy, there's a kind of interesting thing of the I don't know what you call it, the comedy of errors in this whole thing, is that there's so much of a because of that they're accused of heresy by the Inquisition and are set to be executed, and they just barely escaped, and then people are flogged and tortured and disemboweled and drawn and quartered, and by the end of the whole entire thing, just to wrap it up, because a lot more stuff happens. There's like at some point they're going to Paraguay, and then they're in the Americas. I know that much. They go out toward like kind of very indigenous territory, and then people, and then I think at some point Candide eventually kills somebody who I think kills Cunigod's older brother with a rapier. So he's literally killed some people. By the end of it, he's just completely, like I said, disillusioned with it, and like a broken spirits, he returns home. I believe back to Westphalia, and the on the note that I like that it ends with is that rather than the Panglossian kind of insistence of optimism, Candide says instead, I think, or maybe actually, it might have been Pangloss himself says this because he's been so affected by it too. But he says that we must cultivate our garden. So that is kind of one of the things one of the takeaway points I'd say is that Voltaire is, rather than a passive kind of acceptance of the things, we have to kind of do a little bit of the work, and we have to make sure that rather than allowing for such stuff to happen passively and being like, oh, well, I mean, it's the best of all possible worlds, and allowing that gives kind of a validation for our complacency, we could actually do a little bit of the work, that pays off, and the challenge that comes with being able to cultivate and this vast array of stuff that happens and awful miseries that pop up in our world, because that happens all the time. It's happening today, it's happening, and it's going to happen throughout history. It's one constant throughout history, I'd say. But yeah, that is my kind of scattered thoughts about Candide's, Voltaire's Candide, the optimism. And yeah, let me know what you think, and if you made it through this far, because I'm not sure how long this is at the end of it. I kind of lost track of time there, but yeah, if you did, thank you for watching, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one.